Hi everyone, my name is Matt Williams. I'm the Access Fellow at Jesus College at the University of Oxford, and I'm delighted to be able to speak to one of our new graduate students, Cassidy. Cassidy, do you mind introducing yourself for us?
For sure. My name is Cassidy. I'm from Toronto, Canada, and I'm pursuing an MSc and a DPhil at the Oxford Internet Institute here. And I just arrived here a couple months ago, and we're deep into the Michaelmas term, and I'm really enjoying it so far.
Fantastic, great. Well, so I was hoping to pick your brains a little bit about the application process so that we can hopefully give some advice to other prospective graduate applicants to the University of Oxford, not just Jesus College, but the whole university. So let's start with why graduate school? Why did you decide to pursue master's and DPhil, which is what we call a doctorate in Oxford? Why did you want to take that path?
Yeah, for sure. So I think my undergrad experiences were really instrumental for me in thinking about what I was really interested in and what I wanted to pursue further after undergrad. And in particular, I got the opportunity to work with a few professors and people working at Global Affairs Canada, which is a government agency in Canada that looks at Canadian foreign policy, particularly around issues in the digital environment, such as electoral interference in Canadian elections and disinformation. So I got the opportunity to work on some projects with them, and I found out that all of the readings that we had to look at for that project were from the Oxford Internet Institute, which
Right.
has become a global leader in the space of looking at things like misinformation and disinformation and social media and the relationship between social media and democracy. And I thought this was a really timely and really important area to be looking at, and there's a lot of different career paths that you can pursue in this space. So that's really what sparked my interest in the Oxford Internet Institute specifically.
Mm. Well, you've anticipated my follow-up question, which was why Oxford and why England, indeed, because you must have performed well in your undergraduate studies. So you could have chosen to study in California and sit on a beach, but you decided to come and dodge puddles here in England and sort of get soaked in the rain. So could I inquire a little bit further about that? Why did you choose to come to England? You've mentioned a little bit about that, but could you expand a little?
Yeah. So it was really the OII in particular, which is the Internet Institute here, that started about 20 years ago. And they bring people from all different disciplines together to grapple with topics related to the social effects of digital technology. So there are people coming from computer science, from political science, which is what I did my undergrad in, people from economics, geography, and they all come together to really try to navigate some of the most complex challenges of our time. And this is one of the only research departments in the world that gives out degrees for this kind of stuff. So it was the OII in particular that really attracted me. But obviously, studying at Oxford is an incredible experience. It's absolutely beautiful. It's obviously the living in Oxford is something that I was extremely excited about as well.
Excellent. Well, we should note that you're currently staying in a hotel because you're due to move into our brand new building for Jesus College. Uh, are you looking forward to that? It should be quite a nice new experience.
Definitely. And I think that the new building will have a digital hub, which is definitely linked to what I'm studying here.
Mm.
And it looks like it's going to be a beautiful building. So I'm very excited for that.
Good. So drilling a little bit into the details of actually applying, how did you take that first step? And did you feel confident in doing it, or were you slightly sort of intimidated by the process of actually putting in an application to Oxford?
Definitely. It was a long process
Mm.
and really encouraged me to reflect on why I wanted to go into why I wanted to pursue the program, what was really my motivation for applying to the program. And I think the first step that I actually took was I reached out to a few people from Canada on LinkedIn and through email who had pursued the program in the past over the last few years. And I reached out to them and asked them, would you maybe be willing to take some time to just chat about your experiences in the program? What was it like? Was it worth it for you? Because some of the people that I spoke to took out a lot of money to pursue this program. So I was just curious about how they found it, and how it was useful for them in their broader career trajectory as well. So I just kind of hopped on a few calls with a few people who spoke very highly of the program. So that was the first step for me, was kind of doing my homework to speak to these people, and also to read the website really closely, to read about, as well as kind of the Wikipedia of the program, the origins of the program, the types of like political, cultural, et cetera, kind of affiliations and orientation of the program, to see if it was aligned with my own background and interests.
Great, and I'm glad you mentioned finances. Now, money is something that we in England are not terribly comfortable talking about, but it's so important in this particular domain. So do you mind just sharing a little bit of the details about how you thought about financing your graduate studies and how you went about sort of securing some support in that regard?
Definitely. So when I spoke to some of the alumni over the past year, some of them had told me that they did take out loans for this, and they said that it was a big financial investment for them, but ultimately, in their perspective, it was worth it for them because they were able to get a job really quickly after the program and kind of pay it off pretty quickly through having that stable, high, well-paying job, it seems like. And then when I went on those calls with them, they told me that there are also a lot of funding and scholarship opportunities to look into, and not everybody necessarily has to take out a loan. So when I was embarking on the application process, I definitely spent a lot of time making some spreadsheets to look at what are all the different types of funding pathways, because obviously I think taking out loans for a lot of people is kind of a last resort, and something that maybe they'd have to be willing to make that sacrifice if they want to come here. But obviously, like, they'd want to have some funding secured as the best option, definitely. So in my case, I sort of looked at all the scholarships that I found that I was eligible for, and doing that homework can also take some time, because there are some like nationality specific scholarships, some that you don't even hear about, and then you can apply and maybe those are less competitive because they're not as sought after. And then, so ultimately I was successful in getting a scholarship from the university to fund both my MSc and the DPhil, which is called the Clarendon Fund Scholarship, which is based on merit and research experience and potential. So for that one I was told was extremely competitive. So through the process, I didn't think it would be guaranteed that I would secure funding, but I was keeping my hopes up. And then for that scholarship, I actually didn't have to submit a separate application, and it was kind of, the process was built into the Oxford application process itself. So I was fortunate to receive an email in April of 2021, just telling me that my entire Oxford education would be fully funded. So that was definitely something that I was really delighted to hear about.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, that was a great achievement. And what about the other aspects of the application, the paperwork that you had to submit? I suppose one of the core components is a statement of purpose or a personal statement. How did you go about working out what should go in there and how to write it and how to present yourself to the audience that would be considering your application?
Definitely. So I did have to submit a 500-word personal statement for my application. And for that one, I wanted to focus on, so I was thinking as I was pursuing this, what are the things that, based on the other aspects of my application, the committee already knows, and maybe I don't have to articulate that again, such as the program that I pursued in my undergrad, the types of grades that I have. This is all, they already know that. But what they don't really know is my motivation for applying. Why is this program right for me? Why are my interests aligned with the program? So I approached the personal statement with, it was kind of a narrative, like, I guess how I approached that, where the first 2 or 3 paragraphs were kind of building this pathway from, ultimately for me, it started back in high school, when I was in high school during the US 2016 presidential election, and my grade became extremely pulled into the election campaigns, and we were very active on Twitter and kind of polarized in a way that we hadn't seen before. and just thinking about how social media, how allowed students to seem to tap into these different political worlds and how that manifested in our conversations in the classroom. It's really got me thinking about like, how does social media seem to be reshaping our lives in so many ways? And from there, I got to undergrad and I did all this research and got kind of a context or container to think about these dynamics in my own life. And from there, I started to ask a lot of research questions and come across the literature and work coming out of this Oxford Internet Institute specific. There was a project that they were working on, and that I found really fascinating, but I had a lot of further questions that seemed to not be as explored through that project that I think could be interesting to pursue over the next few years. And then from there, being even more specific to talk about the types of methods that I might want to use for my research. So I guess I kind of built this, like, here's my motivation and where it starts, and then how it kind of evolved into a specific research question and methodological focus. So I guess ultimately, I guess my advice for the personal statement would be to show the committee that you do have a genuine interest in what you're pursuing, and that you have a specific research interest that you want to pursue as well.
Yeah, that's terrific advice. So a lot of the time we're dealing with applications for graduate degrees where we get a sense that someone is buying a bit of time. They're not really sure what they would like to do with their life. And so they think, well, I'll take a year, maybe a couple of years doing a graduate degree, and then I can decide later on. And of course, that's not terribly attractive to us, because then we're not confident that that person is really fully committed to studying the subject to the depth that we would be taking them. And also that they have a plan, they have a sense of direction. Now, of course, you're not beholden exactly to that sense of direction. So for example, in your doctoral research, you can deviate from the plan that you set out in the statement, right? But it gives the admissions tutors some confidence that you nonetheless have a sense of what it will entail to be a doctoral student at Oxford. Is that a fair assessment?
I think so, definitely.
Yeah. So it's just that sort of sense of, here's me, here's what I'm interested in, and here's how I'd like to get stuck in. Here's how I'd like to push the field further forward. I think that's another crucial part of what you were describing, is that you had this clear sense of what you would like to add methodologically, theoretically, empirically, and so on. And that is absolutely crucial, because of course, when it comes to research graduate studies, of course, you are going to be pushing the boundaries forward in whichever domain you're choosing to research. And so that was an absolutely crucial component of your statement, I'm fairly confident. Other bits of paperwork you would likely have had to submit would include, well, not necessarily you submitting, but on your behalf, some referees would have had to write nice things about you. How did you go about choosing those people and having those references made ready?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I was in undergrad, I got the opportunity to work on a summer research project so I was looking at basically how political science professors in Canada were maybe changing how they engaged with students in the classroom in light of some of the dynamics of Trump's presidency and the broader global reinvigoration of populism around the world that I was seeing around 2016 and 2017, 2018, that kind of those years before COVID. And I got the opportunity to take this. It's called a reading course in Canada, which is just basically a course where it's just me and the professor doing all these readings and having conversations. So this was a professor who I had the most one-on-one time with, who knew me really well as a student and could speak in depth about my abilities and potential for succeeding at Oxford. So he was the first referee who I was confident that this is someone that I want to speak about me, because he has his familiarity with my academic abilities. And then the two other referees, one of them was my undergrad thesis supervisor. So he's had the most recent experience with me understanding kind of my academic abilities. And I also had meetings with him weekly, and he was also kind of a mentor to me outside of academia as well. So he could speak really in depth about me. And then the other one was another professor who's actually it was a research supervisor. So I had two professors and then a research supervisor who I didn't take any classes with, but I had worked for him over the summer
Right.
and helped him to develop a graduate seminar with Global Affairs Canada as well. So he was more of like an employer in that sense, as well as an academic.
Mm.
So that's kind of, I guess, the approach that I took, was to just think about the academics and research supervisors that I've had the most kind of academically intimate interactions with, who could speak to me in a more in-depth and compelling way.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely what we're looking for when we are surveying graduate applications. What we sometimes are asked is, should my referee be basically the most senior person I've ever crossed paths with? Possibly, but I think the way you've described it is you're looking for people that know you, that are able to speak to your academic potential in a rigorous graduate program. But sometimes if you seek a reference from someone very senior who doesn't know you terribly well, they will effectively just be repeating information from your official transcript. So they'll be able to say, well, you did quite well, you've got good grades, but they won't actually be able to speak to much more than that. I write a lot of these sorts of references, and I'm always sort of emphasizing the bits of information I know that I'm confident that the admissions team won't get in other aspects of the application. In particular, I want to give them a sense of their potential to push beyond undergraduate studies. And you can only really know that if you know the person really well, if they've been your mentor, as you said, if you've cultivated that strong relationship and you've got a sense of what they would be like in a research intensive environment, which is not necessarily that common for undergraduate programs. But it sounds like the referees you cultivated were familiar with your research acumen and your potential to work on your own and in teams, and to stick to task and to meet deadlines and all of those sorts of things that become substantially more important to graduate students than for undergraduate students. What about the interview? You were interviewed, right? How did that go? How did you approach preparing for it, and how did you actually find it when it was happening?
Yes. So for my application, I had to submit a 3,000 word research proposal on top of the other pieces, because I was applying for the 1+3 program.
Right.
So I guess they wanted to gauge how I could, what kind of research I would pursue if I were to pursue the DPhil in addition to the MSc. So that research proposal was for that aspect of that application. And the interview was about an hour long with two researchers at the department who were pursuing research that was very closely connected to the research proposal that I submitted. So most of the questions that I got in the interview were about that proposal. But there were a few questions at the beginning about, just to clarify, like, why are you interested in this program? And there was a question about how the program would fit into my larger trajectory of what I wanted to do after the DPhil. And at the time I was, and I'm still definitely considering academia as a pathway. So I spoke about that and how I could pursue research that that I wanted to do to inform both the academic literature, but also policymakers' agenda, because I've been working on a lot around misinformation, which is definitely a timely topic in political conversations these days. So I did get a few questions about just gauging my career and personal interest in the program, but most of the questions in the interview were centered on the research proposal, and specifically asking me sort of, could you basically summarize the proposal? What are some of the strengths and weaknesses of different types of methods that you're looking to pursue? And I think the question that for me that was the most challenging was basically one of the researchers on the panel said that she tried the research project that I pitched and it didn't really bear any fruit and it wasn't successful. So how would I maybe tweak my proposal, or would I still defend my proposal in light of the fact that hers didn't seem to work? So I guess when I responded by saying that I was aware of her experiment that she did, and I think mine had some very fine-grained conceptual and methodological differences from hers that could mean that when mine is implemented, maybe the findings are going to be different slightly, because sometimes you do see in social science, just based on how a survey question is framed, can dramatically affect the types of responses that you get from people. So it's not necessarily, and if we're importing my study into a different context, maybe I'm doing it in Canada as opposed to the UK, that could have dramatically different findings as well. So I raised a lot of those points to say that I would still maybe pursue this, but it's also interesting to think about other research designs as well in light of cross-cutting evidence. Yeah, sorry, I'm going a little, this is kind of much a deep dive into my interview.
No, that's useful. It's really useful. And it sounds like the interview process. So I don't interview for graduate studies, but I do interview for undergraduate studies. And it sounds like the interviewing approach is markedly different. So for undergraduates, we will give them a sort of a brain expanding puzzle to try and solve with us, which will bear almost no relation to something they've submitted on their application, just to sort of test their intellectual flexibility. But as you were saying, your interview was focused on what you had proposed, and that formed the center of the conversation. It almost sounds closer in format to a job interview for a graduate study, in insofar as they're checking that you are who you say you are the author of the proposal, and you are preparing not only for its potential success, but also its potential shortcomings, because of course that is a fundamental part of graduate research. In my doctorate, there were many points of failure where I had to sort of work around solutions. So thinking not only why your proposal is great, but also where it might potentially have some pitfalls seems like a very sensible way of preparing.
Definitely. It seems, I guess, reflecting on the interview, I can only really speculate about what the committee is looking for, but I suspect it was sort of two things. One is, could you see yourself being a colleague with this person? Like, right. How do they present themselves? Is this someone that you want to have around in your department? And the other thing is, can they articulate a cogent, compelling argument? Can they defend an argument? And how interested are they in the research itself? So maybe three things that it seems like they were trying to gauge just based on how the interview played out.
And so I suppose it's quite difficult to fake those things, right? So the preparation for such an interview was simply doing all of that homework that you said earlier, where you looked into the degree, you prepared that research proposal so assiduously, and you just got stuck into the subject. So I suppose sometimes people might be fooled into thinking you can sort of prepare the night before an interview and suddenly sort of have all of that available, but that sounds clearly not to be the case. So how is it now? Now you are in Oxford, how are you finding it? And also, sort of subsidiary question to that, how are you finding it as someone from overseas, from Canada? Have you experienced much of a culture shock? Have you felt welcomed in the city? Yeah, how have you found it? And do please be honest. We like honesty.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it so far. I find it's so beautiful here, just the architecture, the old buildings, the narrow cobblestone streets is definitely, I think that some of the colleges, such as Jesus, are older than the founding of Canada. So it's been definitely different from that perspective. There were a few difficulties in terms of just navigating travel coming over here, some of which COVID related, because at the time we weren't clear if I'd had to have to quarantine or not, but I think a lot of those restrictions have been lifted. And then getting like a phone number, getting a bank account, some of these things, logistical challenges. But I'm at the point now where I've settled in. I've kind of gotten back into a routine after kind of navigating the COVID situation back in Canada. And so it's been really enjoyable to get back into a routine and have a lot of in-person classes. The people in the cohort are really sharp and interesting from all around the world, doing a lot of different different jobs and have different experiences on top of the degree. I guess for me, maybe the part that has been the least, I guess, to be very transparent, like the least, I guess, intellectual, I guess on the more intellectual side, this term is a lot of review for me.
Right.
I think mostly because I came here right from undergrad and I do have a social science background. So a lot of the classes have been geared towards maybe catching up people who don't have a social science background, people coming from industry or people who are out of school or they did a different degree in undergrad.
Right.
And I think it's really good that the program does that and has that elasticity to make sure that everybody kind of is on the same page when the hard stuff begins. But it seems like for people who do have a social science background, it's maybe less intellectually stimulating than they thought it would be going into the first term.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. And I think that's quite a common experience across various graduate programs, because as you say, there's people coming from all sorts of different backgrounds needing to reach a similar level quite quickly. And as you say, the cohorts for graduate studies at Oxford are highly diverse in terms of national background and other forms of diversity. So in terms of sort of fitting in, you're never expected to change who you are or suddenly sort of adopt English affectations. If anything, that's discouraged because it might be super weird. But it's nice to hear that you've not struggled in those regards. Great. So final question, Cassidy. If you could go back and visit your younger self and give a piece of advice now, given all of your experiences, what might that advice be?
That's a tough question.
It is.
What age are we talking about?
Oh, well, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I suppose that depends on when you think some sort of critical intervention might have been needed. So maybe there was a point in time when you weren't sure about whether to apply, or there was some sort of critical juncture in your story that you feel an intervention might have been useful. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think something that helped me in undergrad that I guess I did realize it, but maybe I realized it a bit later than I should have, is that it's important to have a mindset of just enjoying content, or enjoying experiences as much as possible, rather than feeling like something is a stepping stone to the next thing and kind of instrumentalizing a course for the purpose of like, I need to take this course to get to this course, and then you're not enjoying it, right? So it's kind of cliche of just enjoying the journey and not the destination. But I think that time just like seems to fly so quickly, and I'm realizing that as I'm still young, but like as I'm getting older, I guess, kind of seeing how quickly undergrad went by for me, and now that I'm here, I do want to make the most of it, both on the academic side, but also on the social side, on the personal side. I want to go to as many events as I can, meet new people, cultivate a lot of great friendships, right? And so in undergrad, I think for myself, I was very focused on the academics, and I think that's important. But I guess it's also important to look up and put yourself out there and meet people and enjoy life as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice. And I suppose, ironically, when you stop trying to instrumentalize, stop trying to sort of always look at the next stepping stone, that is instrumentally useful, ironically, right? It does actually typically make people better academics, better students, better workers, because you find the joy in those day-to-day activities, and you no longer sort of feel alienated from them potentially. So it's certainly advice that I give my own students regularly, simply so that they will perform better. So I think that's a wonderful piece of advice. So thank you enormously, Cassidy. I think this has been very helpful. And yeah, I look forward to working with you further in Jesus College outreach and access. So thanks very much.
Yeah, likewise, Matthew. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. All right. Cheers. Bye.